Rachael Maskell, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea. We've committed to covering palliative care. That's obviously been a big debate because, in particular, of the assisted dying bill getting its second reading in the House of Commons. But Rachel, kick us off. You're going to be very much involved in leading the Palliative Care Commission. Just tell us what that is.
Well, I think we've heard throughout the whole debate how important it is to have excellence at the end of life. And sadly, 100,000 people across the country don't receive palliative care at all. Those that do, it's inequitable in its provision, but often too late as well. And therefore, there's real need. So I've been working with the palliative care community, that's hospices, charities, and clinicians, academics, and to say, have we really got palliative care right? Could we optimize it? Is there much more that can be done? And the resounding answer is yes, absolutely. Whether we look at funding or whether we look at the provision that is available, far too often people are very late in the day when they do get those referrals into a service. Yet we know early intervention can not only provide financial savings, but also really help people through the end of life experience which they have. And it's right that everyone has good access to care. And sadly, I think over the last few weeks, we've been hearing some absolutely traumatic stories which have clearly left a scar on relatives. And I can understand why, whereas actually enhancing palliative care could make a real difference.
Tell us where you think we are at the moment with, as you say, this is a lot of people affected. How good is our palliative care system at the moment, and what does it need?
Well, the good news is we're ranked as the best in the world. So we know we're doing something right. But it is about the availability of such care. And when 1 in 4 people that should get palliative and end of life care don't get it, then we know that it's inequitable in its distribution. Um, the reality is, if people have the time to be able to manage their end of life, have that control, to co-produce what that care is like together with their clinicians, then it can make a better provision for them, better provision for their family and carers, and also enable the service itself to be better coordinated. At the moment, between primary, secondary, and tertiary care, we haven't got the coordination wrapped around the patient. And often it is the patient who is trying to pull things together. So I think it's really important that we have a look through this commission about how we can deliver a better service and a better experience for the family as well as the patient.
How long do you think you're going to need on this issue? We will come to the assisted dying bill that is going through Parliament at the moment, but who will the Commission report to, and how long is it going to take?
Well, first of all, we know that there's so much research out there. So there's a lot of collation of the excellent work that has already been done. And there's a lot of analysis as well as to what's happening, what should happen, and what is required. A lot of this is about how this now integrates within a system. So integrating this with the 10-year delivery plan, which Wes Streeting is talking about for the health service, would make sense because what's happened is palliative medicine has moved into the fringes of healthcare when actually it's a core speciality, and being able to reintroduce it back into the NHS is really important in that sense, because the NHS needs to fund it properly and ensure that the provision is broad. The Commission will ultimately, the target is always going to be the health secretary. Of course, the Treasury may have an interest as well, and therefore, I think being able to feed into comprehensive spending review processes is important. I'll obviously liaise with the health secretary as we go through this process, because I really want there to be a understanding of what can be achieved. I mean, of course, we're not just talking about health professionals; we are talking about other services as well, whether it's a DWP, whether it is housing, whether it's local government. There are so many different departments that could be involved in ensuring that journey. And of course, for some people, their choice will be about having that end of life care at home. For other people in a hospice, and of course, we know there are people, for instance, in the criminal justice system who nonetheless should be able to access a good support at the end of life.
Do you hope that this will be cross-party?
Well, it's not really going to be political, because it's really driven by the sector, because the sector are the experts, and that's why drawing on the evidence within the sector, I'm kind of helping and working on this, because I'm chair of the Dying Well all-party parliamentary group in Parliament, together with a peer, Baroness Laura Finlay, and we've been working very closely. But I think what's really important is that there's ownership of it within the sector as well, because ultimately it's their service. So helping facilitate that is really my role.
Obviously, this comes in the context of the assisted dying bill getting its second reading recently. Rachel, how did you approach that bill and how did you vote?
I voted against the legislation, having scrutinised it very carefully, and knowing myself as a former clinician, the provisions around security of decision making within healthcare. I saw the bill as very, very broad in its scope and quite unsafe for patients, particularly around the issues of assessing capacity, coercion, and ensuring a prognosis was within 6 months. Also, the scope is so broad around which patients could be in scope, and particularly where it says if you kind of stop taking the medication you're on and then become within scope, you could then move on to being somebody that could be subject to an assisted suicide. So I naturally believe that we should assess the legislation clause by clause on the strength of those clauses. I just do not believe it held up to vigor. And then moving into a process where there's a secret process, one doctor with one patient. We know that closed environments are not safe environments. We talk about it ever since Winterbourne View. And therefore, I have concern. And it's interesting that the Isle of Man is looking at a kind of parole board style approach to the legislation they're spending months and years shaping. We only had the bill 17 days, no time at all to assess such a complex area. And I say that having been on the select committee, the Health and Social Care Select Committee, looking at this issue for 14 months. And I found it challenging in that time. So colleagues that haven't, let alone new MPs, still getting to grasp with the system here, I think it's just been rushed through. And even the judicial safeguards we've heard from the justices or former justices who have like Sir James Mumby, who have been quite scathing of the security which the bill gives. So I do think if we're hearing those words from leading clinicians working in palliative medicine who really just can't understand this bill, and then people who are in those areas of law and decision making being scathing, I think we really do need to hit the pause button.
What does hit the pause button mean for this bill? Because it will now go to what's called the committee stage, the report stage. That's meant to happen next April. What do you think should happen?
Well, I believe that we need to really have an understanding in Parliament what is achievable with palliative medicine. And that's why I think this commission is of real importance. To feed into that process, because I have listened to some quite traumatic end of life experiences from people here, and over recent weeks, and kind of people I've been interviewed with, and then when I've talked to people afterwards, had a real paucity of care. And that should never be the case. And I really felt their pain and their trauma from that. So I think we really need to have a better analysis of what the reality is of what people face. The fact is, the vast majority of people have a very peaceful death. And I worked at the fringes of life and death for 20 years in the NHS. And I have to say, the scale of the debate and the trauma that was expressed there is not the kind of the reality out in the rest of the world. So we've got to get that evidential, factual base. And I think the fact that we didn't even have an impact assessment or any critical analysis presented to Parliament, I am not surprised that Parliament really felt the pain of those stories and wanted to do something. As politicians, we want to do something, but what we do really matters. And I am not convinced that this is the right mechanism.
Do you think, therefore, that either the Commons or the Lords should block this bill?
I do not believe this bill is fit for purpose. I do believe it's unamendable, because there is so much that would have to change, to make it anywhere near safe to protect the public. So I really do believe that there was no reason it had to come forward in this session of this Parliament. And I really do think that pause button should be hit. Let's find out the reality, the facts. Let's see the impact assessments. Jurisdictions like Jersey spending months. We know that Scotland is spending years looking at the legislation. We shouldn't be rushing this through in a process. And even if you go back to the work David Steele did around the Abortion Act he brought forward, he did a lot of consensus building before he brought that legislation. None of that work has even commenced. So I really do think that we should be in a learning space at the moment as Parliament as opposed to a legislating space.
And is there a parliamentary mechanism that can be used to pause, stop, whatever word we might use, this private members bill?
It's an interesting question because we'll all remember back in the 2012 Health and Social Care Act and under Andrew Lansley, and he did pause the legislation. It was called the pause while government relooked at that disaster piece of legislation, and much of it was rewritten that time. So anything can happen, I'm sure, if you find the right mechanisms. Of course, this is on a tight timetable, but we must remember there's other parliamentary sessions which will follow this one as well. So there's no need to rush it through. I mean, as a Health Select Committee, we saw the growing interest in this area, and that's why we studied it at great length and detail. And so we prepared a report, but I have to say we did not expect it to come up within the first few months of a new parliament, not least when over half the MPs were completely new to the legislative processes.
Has that committee report reported?
Yes, we reported in February last year, following the inquiries, and we had a really comprehensive report. But what really came to the fore of our inquiry was that we need to improve palliative medicine. So here we are again, saying actually the focus is on the wrong thing. Because if we got palliative medicine right, then we could say what else is there that's going wrong that we then need to address. Is assisted suicide something that we need to look at, or is it not? And I think on that basis, we'll be able to make an informed choice. At the moment, it's being built on the back of a broken health service, social care fragmented, and palliative care massively underfunded. That's no way to make good policy and good decision making.
Thanks so much, Rachel, for joining the Daily Tea.
Thank you.